You know what I like about Friday nights in the synagogue now, because they slowly became a gathering place for a slightly different congregation. And it's nice, because I do understand that some people come both on Friday and Saturday, but most people choose either Friday or Saturday because of the work plans or other arrangements. But Friday nights attract people in their 30s and 40s quite, and it is wonderful to see. So yesterday I had I don't know, wisdom or not, but I shared with the audience, with the congregation, that I am not necessarily a fan of Taylor Swift. Which is, of course, doesn't say that I don't like it. I don't like her songs or text. I immensely respect her, and I really do. But the question that I have is, and luckily it was received with understanding, so which I am very glad, and I'm very happy, because it's not an easy thing to accept for some people. But we do live in the world where disagreements are not always accepted with wisdom. Often difference in opinions can lead to quite a significant personal conflict. And I'm not going to speculate why it happened, but it seems to me that when people disagree with each other, they take it personally and they become enemies. And I often, too, have this internal dilemma. Sometimes it's hard for me to feel that I am a part of the same people, the same religion as some other Jewish groups. For example, some Jewish religious people go to Temple Mount, and especially it happened on the Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of Av. And they portray it as the highest value in Judaism. For me, the Western Wall and the Temple Mount represent something very similar to idolatry. When you serve stones, yes, it represents something important in Judaism. It represents our history. But I don't think that it's a value to go on Temple Mount. Your prayers are not accepted better there than anywhere else. And therefore, I don't see it as a value. But some groups do. Well, liberal Judaism, and I think Judaism in general, has accepted the fact that we have synagogues now. We don't have temple. We don't want to reintroduce sacrifices. But again, some people do. Some people want it. So my question is, how do I keep the balance between my integrity with what I think and unity? Because after all, we are all Jewish people, even those who go up on the mount, on the Temple Mount, to pray and provoke potential conflict. So, and I think that there is a message in this week's Torah portion that is helpful to approach this dilemma, this internal question. Contemporary commentator, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, draws meaning from Shema, from these words, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. He notes that there is a seeming paradox in this verse. This verse is a declaration of monotheism, of the fact that God is one, and it's also a declaration of God's unity. But yet, two different words used as a name for God. why there are two different names in the declaration of God's unity. So, and Rabbi Riskin then, so one name is Adonai and the other is Elohim or Eloheinu. Rabbi Riskin then points out that early Jewish tradition associates God's qualities of mercy and love with the word Adonai, and God's qualities of judgment and punishment with Elohim. So Riskin then says that when Moses first spoke the words of the Shema, he meant to clarify a significant problem faced by the Israelites and by all people. The problem of understanding God's unity and the way God works in our lives and in the universe. So in other words, the message of Shema is not obvious, is not banal. The most natural way of thinking and believing in God is to create two gods. One God is the God who creates everything that's good for you, and the other God is the God of everything bad. And this is more natural way of understanding theology. But Judaism says, no, God of justice and punishment is the same God as the God of mercy and forgiveness. You need to live in the world where the same God has created Moses and Amalek, Churchill and Stalin, Israel and Gaza, Chinese and Uyghur people, Ukrainians and Russians. Same God. And it's hard. Jacob Weinstein, an American Reform rabbi who lived in the first half of the 20th century, wrote this about Shema. The Shema, he says, is against the plurality of small gods and half-gods and no gods. It's against the fragmentalizing idolatry of worshipping a part of a whole. It's a unity against the duality that would neatly package life into good and evil compartments and assign evil to a lesser scapegoat God, leaving to the chief God the dignity of presiding over unalloyed good. From this perspective, Judaism seems to convey a relativist message. Since the same God created everything, people must not decide on what's good and what's evil. It's not your business. This decision must be left to God and God only, or alternatively, one can argue that everything is ultimately for the best because it's all created by God. An example of such approach is again our understanding of the temple. Because we believe that the destruction of the temple was ultimately for the good, therefore we interpret our tragedy that happened 2,000 years ago as something that happened for the good. I can use this theology that everything is for the best to describe or to explain things that happened 2,000 years ago. But what can I say to people who experience tragedy now? I don't think it's going to be useful. And therefore, we need to dig a bit deeper. I don't think it's enough just to say that everything is created by God and therefore you shouldn't decide what's good and what's evil. In her article in the Times of Israel, Rabbi Esli Goldstein put it very well, describing why she's not fasting on Tisha B'Av. She wrote, "I'm not fasting on Tisha B'Av because ultimately the destruction of the temple lent way for the democratization of Judaism, wresting power and authority out of the hands of the elite and corrupt priesthood and placing it in the hands of scholars and then rabbis who represent people. Eventually, in our day, all Jews have the authority to be their own priests, to hold holiness in their own hands, to read their own psalms, and as they ascend to the stairs of their synagogue, to lead their own prayers, and even to make their own halachic decisions. I celebrate that democratization. It doesn't make me sad. Well, I completely agree with Rabbi Goldstein, but again, it's easy to speak about the tragedy of the destruction of the temple that happened 2,000 years ago from this wisdom of our time, wisdom of ability to step out of time and look on the wider picture. It doesn't help me to think in those terms about recent events. Acts that seem evil happen all the time, and it would be cruel to declare them for the ultimate good of humanity. Such an approach doesn't comfort the living victims of tragedies. Rabbi Dr. Leo Back knew it very well, and in his book, The Essence of Judaism, he wrote, "The wisdom of Judaism, its very history so devised it, is that it sees life as a task imposed upon human beings by God. Suffering, or evil, is part of that task. Every creative individual experiences it. Through suffering, human beings experience those conflicts that give tragic significance to their will to fulfillment." In other words, in essence, evil does exist, and it is important to acknowledge it. However, confronting it allows us to understand our own strength. According to Leo Back, through reciting Shema or through living in the world where both good and evil coexist, we don't deny evil. Quite the opposite. We admit that it exists, but try to put it in a wider context. Everything we consider evil helps us to understand ourselves. And by doing so, we bring good and evil into unity. What we consider as bad can and must give us strength and significance. We can and must do everything we can to learn from events we consider bad, from people we consider villains, and from times we consider wrong. If we don't, they will just remain such. If we analyze them, there is a chance we will turn them into an influence for good, for us and many others. Therefore, when we see people who act against our deep convictions, we need to turn our frustration into a positive learning opportunity. The engagement with perceived evil can become an inspiration and an impulse for a deep change for good. In a famous Talmud story, schools of Hillel and Shammai argued for years. They had a fight that lasted years. And it ended with this miraculous story when the voice of God appeared and said, "Stop fighting. These and these are the words of living God. But the halacha is according to the words of Hillel." And then the Talmud asks, why? Why did God prefer Hillel? And the Talmud answers, because Hillel used to say the words of Shammai first, and only then state his position. It's not enough to declare something or someone evil. We need to make sure we understand it. We need to do our best to learn from it. And if you still disagree after genuine understanding of your opponent's position, make sure this never happens again. This bad thing never happened again. It's better to learn the lessons from tragedy than to allow it to define us and our time. Shabbat Shalom. We are concluding our service.